Welcome to Rebel Health Radio, bringing the best in alternative and integrative medicine to your ears.
Well, hello everyone, it's Patricia Warby, Alchemy Therapies here, and today, I was hoping to actually publish today a recording of a discussion I had with my friend and colleague, Dr. Rainer Vivega, an ongoing series that we do on the nature of life and kind of the underpinning patterns and organization of life, and then sort of how number and maths kind of underlies that. We covered an awful lot in that discussion, and I'm hoping, in fact, I'll be able to publish that next week now because I haven't received it yet. But it was a fascinating discussion. So today I thought I'd do my own thing and do a riff a little bit on the rhythms of life, if you like, the resonance, the basis of biological life, because all of us, for one reason or another, are exposed to this without really understanding it. Now, how it came up actually was initially one of my clients was questioning me about how it is that kind of dealing with underlying emotions and changing the pattern of your belief systems and how you feel can actually translate at a cellular level. Now, this is a really good question. Okay, how is it that changing how I feel emotionally can change how my body operates? And at first glance, you may think, well, emotions just can't have anything to do with that. Well, I can tell you they absolutely do. Because in my work with people, I help them to release repressed emotion, and emotions have a resonance. Okay, so there's the first clue. Emotions have a resonance from contractive emotions through to expansive emotions, joy, gratitude, and so on. And although nobody can absolutely say what the frequency of each emotion is, I don't think anyone's measured that yet, we do know the difference between feeling sad or depressed and feeling elated and joyful. There is just a qualitative difference as well as a quantitative difference in that experience. But look, why would that affect your health? Well, because we are a self-organizing system. We are a complex. That's what complex means. Okay, it doesn't mean it's complicated. It has a very specific meaning of self-organizing or fractal. If you think of Russian dolls, that's an example, if you like, or a tree branching, or the way our lungs branch. And our heart rhythm is actually fractal as well. And you're familiar with the way the heart rhythm goes. But if you focus on, you really go into that and focus in greater detail, you'll find that that rhythm repeats itself at smaller and smaller scales. And that's what a fractal is. It's a self-repeat at smaller scales. Okay, so your heart rhythm is fractal. How is it then that your emotions, which are a resonance, can translate into differential functioning? Feeling like you're functioning better, so having better digestion, better immunity, more energy. Well, that's the thing, of course, that most people notice first of all. And when we release some of the emotions, the body is allowed to have a different signal, which it's communicating cellularly inside the cells through the mitochondria. Now, everyone knows mitochondria, pretty much everyone knows now, particularly if you suffer from an energy or fatigue-related problem, you will know that the mitochondria are your energy factories in your cells, but they're far more than that, okay? Because they were once bacteria that got enveloped by an archaebacteria, which is a sort of ancient form of bacteria, slightly between what we know as bacteria and multicellular organisms. And so we kind of created this hybrid, if you like, between a single-celled organism and a multi-celled organism by actually enveloping and creating these bacteria inside, which we now call mitochondria, which work for the organism rather than just themselves. And so they have all the facilities and all the capabilities that bacteria have. Rapid multiplication, they can grow and bud and divide very, very quickly. intercommunication between these little mitochondria, and they often form like little chains called guilds to communicate. The ability to pass information between each other. So some of the I guess metabolites of energy production, ATP, ADP, and so on, are not just the energy currency, but they're also indicating the state of the cell, how the cell is functioning. And so high ATP, of course, would be that you're in a good state, you've got lots of energy. Low ATP would suggest that you're in a sort of shutdown, you're in a bit of a energy conservation state, and that could be because your body is perceiving threat. Now, threat is not necessarily what's happening out there. It can also be the internal environment, what you're thinking and feeling about yourself. And if you grew up in an environment where perhaps it wasn't safe to be you, or you didn't feel supported in your emotions, you're carrying a huge toxic burden of repressed sort of stress, chronic stress from those experiences that kind of depress your emotional ability to regulate yourself. All right. And I always use my slinky here because it's just such a great analogy of how a nervous system should regulate. So, this is activation, this is shut down, rest and repair. But a lot of the people I work with are either in total shutdown, no movement at all, or they're up here really jangly, anxious, having panic attacks, feeling just out of sorts. And we want to bring back that regulation, that lovely smooth regulation. So what's that got to do with mitochondria? Well, nervous systems require energy, okay? They're one of the highly energy requiring systems of the body, along with your circulation, your heart, your liver. But certainly the nervous system, which is your connecting system to your outside environment and your internal environment, it's kind of the networking system, needs energy. And so if your system is saying, I'm in danger, it's going to deliver that message both neurologically and also chemically to your cells, and in particular your mitochondria, which are very, very sensitive to their internal environment. And so they can actually reduce or expand the energy capacity depending on what they perceive, you as an organism perceives, and they receive that message, is going on in your life. Case in point, okay, you release some of the beliefs that you had about yourself, like I'm not allowed to experience good things, or nobody listens to me, or it's not safe to be me, or I'm too different, or I don't deserve. All of those unconscious beliefs have a message which is translated, which says, don't expand, don't grow, don't expend energy, stay really in hibernation, stay where you are. And so when you try and expend energy, you try and do the things of normal life, you end up absolutely exhausted. And this is the basis of fatigue, because you simply can't, the mitochondria can't produce enough energy because they're in a controlled shutdown state called the cell danger response. I've talked about that before. And actually releasing some of the beliefs allows a new message to be filtered down through to your cells that says it's okay now. It isn't an on-off switch, by the way. It's more of a resonance. Okay, so back to Slinky. It's more of a resonance. Okay, it's a movement. It's a vibration. And the amplitude and frequency of that vibration signals information. And so beginning to learn that it's okay to be me, even just by saying, I'm learning that it's okay to be who I am, to have opinions. It's okay to disagree. It's okay to feel what I feel, changes the pattern that signals to your mitochondria whether they can release more energy. And that I've observed in, well, at least 2 clients this week, one of whom has been very housebound for a long time, probably about 7 or 8 years since she had her crash. The crash, by the way, is usually a trigger, an overwhelming emotional event. Usually it's to do with relationships, sometimes it's finance, sometimes it's a viral infection, many different ways, but that will cause the crash. But then the recovery, the cell danger response never quite gets fully cycled back into recovery, and people stay stuck in these low energy states. Now, my client this week informed me that she'd been out for a swim, a little swim in the slow lane. She drove herself there. It may sound like nothing to the majority of people who are busy living their lives, who think nothing of going to the gym 3 times a week and, power walking or whatever it is you do. For somebody who has been stuck at home, unable to do anything beyond the basics, wash, dress, get up, sit, to be able to get out in the car, number one, amazing, totally amazing. Drive herself, go for a swim, meet up with friends. We take this all for granted as if that's just the way life is, which of course it should be. But for people suffering from chronic fatigue related conditions, these things just disappear. And so to hear that news from her was just wonderful for me. And she asked me though at the end, but isn't it, how can emotions release energy? And so I really wanted to answer that question. I explained the cell danger response. I explained the fact that everything is in resonance with everything else, that mitochondria are sensing the information and responding to what they believe is happening. And it all makes complete sense. And now we have an explanation for why changing the way you feel changes your experience of life. And I really, really want to write about this, and I am in the middle of writing my book, Mind Medicine, which will explain this a little more. I've got another idea for another book, which will be more on the biological aspects of self-organization, which is what biological systems are. They're self-organizing, they repair, they heal, they grow, they evolve. Now, that was great news. I also had another client who equally is beginning to unwind this contractive, frozen state. And I explained to her that it's, as I say, it's not a switch, it's a spring, all right? And obviously it doesn't just go up and down, it goes in motion. So the way I kind of draw it with my finger and I say it's gonna reverberate. So you're gonna have a period where you feel better, and then you do stuff, and then you'll go down a bit because your body is not sure, not certain that this is okay. Are you going back to the old coping strategies of overworking, overgiving, being over-responsible? Because they're all personality factors highly linked to chronic fatigue. And then once it realizes that you're not returning exactly to that, but you're doing things in a new way, in a new, more harmonic way, then it can release a bit more energy again. And then there'll be another little blip, but it'll be less than the previous one, and so on and so forth, until you get to the point where you can do stuff without payback, all right, without that awful energy deficit that people with CFSME get for 2 to 3 days after expending energy. And then you're really on the road to recovery. So I had to explain that, and I think it's a really important piece of information for people like yourself who are maybe watching this and wondering, why is it that we get sick with these kind of chronic conditions, and how do we heal? Just to say it's a rhythm, all right? And eventually it will assert itself and right itself. Now, while I'm on the subject of rhythms, I want to also talk about things I've been investigating recently are heart rate rhythm. We all know we have the heart rate rhythm, and that it times itself to the breath. Okay, this is the basis of heart rate variability, or HRV, which is a very important measure of health. It's not actually measuring just the health of your heart, although it's a very good indicator, that the variability should be high. Okay, it should go up when you breathe in, the heart rate should go up, and then it should drop down again when you breathe out. And people who have a very steady rhythm are actually ill. We should have a variability in that. And so it's a really great measure of your autonomic nervous system functioning, because the thing that actually links the two, the the control of your heart is in your brain. Obviously, your breath feeds back to your brain. So it's the brain and heart which is connected by your autonomic nervous system, in particular the vagus nerve. So it's a measure of autonomic strength, of autonomic flexibility, if you like. And so back to Slinky, it shows that things are moving well when your HRV is high and variable. Okay, now that led me on to a guy called Dennis Noble, who was one of the first scientists to look at what created the heart rhythm itself. And he found you could mathematically kind of determine the rhythm just by looking at the different voltages inside and outside heart cells and kind of making a mathematical model of that. And his predictions predicted exactly the heart rhythm that we see. Now, Dennis himself is, I think he must be in his 80s now, but he wrote some wonderful books, one of which I bought. I'm looking at buying some more of his, because he really has an idea of the rhythmic, self-organizing nature of the human body. And then that led me on to a video, which I'm going to include in the description down here, about the nature of, it's called The Secret Life of Chaos. And it's Jim Al-Khalili, who is a British scientist who I've followed before because he talks a lot about quantum biology, which I'm very interested in. But this one is about complexity theory and chaos, and how complexity can develop from simplicity when certain little tweaks are made in the system. We can have both unpredictable outcomes, which is what we call chaos in science, unpredictability, but we also have pattern, which is complexity in action, self-organization. It's a wonderful, wonderful film. It's been made, very high production values, very interesting. I've watched it twice. I would encourage any of you who are interested in science, biology, to watch it. It's not overwhelming, because I think complexity and chaos theory can be very overwhelming because it's very mathematical. It doesn't use any maths at all to understand it. But just to understand that self-organizing is what the human body and all living things do. It enables us, for instance, to solve, or at least understand, the way that individual cells, when they, say when the sperm fuses with the egg and creates the first cell in the embryo, how the embryo then develops into different tissues, because all the cells are identical. They bud off each other. They do something called mitosis, which is just splitting and dividing. How is it that cells know whether to become a liver cell or a skin cell? And this is at the basis of what we call morphogenesis, how it works. And both Dennis Noble and Jim Al-Khalili were talking about that. And what I didn't know, and this really fascinated me, was one of the first people to investigate this was codebreaker extraordinaire Alan Turing. Okay, now he's famous in several ways. Okay, so he was a wartime codebreaker at Bletchley Park in the UK. He helped to crack the Nazi naval code, which we know helped to end the war and saved many, many Allied lives. But he was also interested in the mathematics of nature, and he wrote a really important paper in 1952. Now, I had a look at that this morning. The paper is not for me. It's very difficult to understand. It's very mathematical. What an amazing mind this guy had. But he was looking at how simple things can develop pattern. And he thought, when he sort of mapped it out and drew it out, that it looked a bit like the hide of a cow, you know, the black and white splotches, or those on a leopard or a giraffe. And he wondered if nature's patterns were somehow linked to this self-organizing growth. And he wondered too about morphogenesis and how that worked. And he started to kind of map this out mathematically. Now, tragically, 2 years after he wrote that paper, he died. And no one is quite sure whether it was suicide, although that was reported at the time and still continues to be reported. he was gay, which at that time to be a gay man was illegal. It was subject to brutal policing. And in fact, Alan Turing was found guilty of gross indecency because he reported a burglary at his home by one of his ex-lovers who the relationship went wrong and decided to burgle him. And when he reported it, he was actually arrested. And then he was found guilty of basically converting this man because he was the educated one. And so they regarded him as the person who was really in the wrong. It's a bizarre story. Now, he was pardoned in 2013, which is wonderful. But of course, there were 50,000 men arrested and tried, whose lives were ruined around that time, who've never been pardoned, of course, just for expressing their sexuality, which is really awful. So we'll never know, unfortunately, how or why Alan died. There is a theory that because he was in such a secure environment, the security services needed him to be absolutely untouchable. And of course, being a gay man, once it was known, was a security risk. And so there is potentially the idea that he may have been killed from a cyanide-laced apple. We'll never know. But the good news, I guess, if there is any in this story, is that his ideas were subsequently taken up by other wonderful scientists, one of which I've written about in my book that I wrote last year. And that was Benoit Mandelbrot. When I was looking at the nature of pattern, I called it the mystery of number. But there were other people, Boris Belousov, who I didn't know about, who found that there was an oscillation in certain chemicals that he put together to mimic what happens in the cells when they burn sugars. It's called the citric acid cycle or the Krebs cycle. And he added chemicals together, and the clear liquid went colored, as you would expect when you're adding a colored liquid. And then weirdly, it started to oscillate back and forth from clear to colored, which was so totally unexpected and broke all the laws of physics that when he tried to publish a paper on that oscillation, he was rejected over many times, told that that was impossible. And he obviously had made a mistake in his experimentation, which broke him. And so he actually didn't continue in science after that, which again is another terrible, sad effect of when people break out of the mold of what's expected, often their ideas aren't accepted at the beginning. So he found the same self-organizing system, but this time in chemistry, which is what actually Alan Turing was looking at. And then, of course, there's Mandelbrot, who discovered the fractal patterning using infinitely I suppose you would say, feedback loops of fractal organization, a system that feeds back on itself. That's what it is. That's what self-organization means. Information is fed back. And so we have the beautiful patterns that forms. And I'd really encourage you to look up Mandelbrot set if you haven't ever come across that. It is the most mesmeric and beautiful pattern you will ever come across. And then I guess finally it sort of ends with a very interesting new investigation being done at the moment with self-organizing computer programs. The last 10 minutes of the film in the show notes blew my mind, because I knew most of the stuff beforehand, although the Turing investigation I didn't know. But this guy who is doing self-organizing computing shows that over several generations, what he does is he sort of creates an artificial brain in the computing, and he allows it to learn, to feed back on itself in a very simple, initially it was about learning to walk. And so it'll show you these sort of model humanoids trying to walk, and of course most of them will fall over, but the feedback allows you to select the ones that are better at it for some variable reason. In biology, that's genetics. Okay, that's when we add variability into the system, is when we combine a male and female, and there are some variables in there, because you get genes from mother and father. But in the computing system, it was just, they would allow a little differential to develop, and then they would self-select. That's the feedback for ones that did whatever task it was, in this case walking, better. And over 10 generations, instead of falling over immediately, you start to see this humanoid thing start to walk. And over 20 generations, now it's starting to look like real walking. That was fascinating. And then the final bit is looking at how a humanoid system works when it's hit or poked, and these latter iterations are starting to react in ways that human bodies react when they're collided with. And it's actually more accurate than anything that a human programmer could program. This self-organizing computing feedback loop creates a real looking human movement. Please watch the last 10 minutes if you watch nothing else, but I do recommend the whole video. So now we know that this is how nature works, okay? That we are a self-organizing complex system that learns from its experience. And going right back to where I started, you know, we learn from our experience, but sometimes we get stuck. What we need to do is kind of revisit the experiences that once overwhelmed us and repattern them as over. That's what I do with people, okay? I never understood it mathematically before, but now I kind of do. And so I create a new iteration, a new feedback loop. If any of this sounds interesting to you on whatever level, whether you'd like to come and work with me or you'd like to ask me about some of what I'm learning here, please get in touch. You'll find me on alchemytherapies.co.uk, and I look forward to hearing from you. Take care. Bye-bye, everyone.
Hey, hope you enjoyed listening to Rebel Health Radio. Do subscribe and look forward to catching you soon.